Well, welcome back. We're going to flow test, we're going to set up to flow test an exhaust port. We're not actually going to flow test an exhaust port. The exhaust area of the cylinder head is a little bit more complicated than the intake side. On the intake side, we simply have a radius inlet guide and we move that down, and really that's it. We'll get into flow testing an intake manifold a couple of different ways in a couple more sessions. Now on the exhaust, so when you go from intake to exhaust, number one, don't turn the head around. I see that often. We flow test with a header, keep the head the same place, put a header on it. There are some flow tubes that people sell that you move from one cylinder to the next, and it gives you a little bit of direction out the exhaust port. Those work pretty well. I don't like moving anything when I'm flow testing. If I'm going to do all these exhaust ports, I just want to go bang, bang, bang. I don't want to be moving the tube down. The header will also direct the hot exhaust air out of your way. Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So I flow test with a header. I don't turn the head around. And then mechanically you have to switch the machine around. So you have to change your flow ranges from intake to exhaust. You have to close off your intake flow knob, and you have to open up your exhaust, and you have to start at a high flow range. Now when I flow test again, I have to go ahead and I have to move this down to the exhaust, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open this up to 606 lift like I did on the intake. Now I mentioned in the last video why you want to start high and go low. Your high and mid-range flow numbers are more important than your 100 and 200 number, and if you spend too much time at 100 and 200, the machine heats up and the room heats up. So you want to spend as little time as possible on those lower ranges. So I go from high to low for that reason. It's just quicker and it keeps the room cooler. Okay? So now we're set up to flow test the exhaust port. We're not going to actually do a flow test, but it would be the same basic procedures. You don't have to check the leak because you already did that. You just want to make sure you're over the exhaust valve, not the intake. Okay, that's something that can kind of really screw you up, but you'll know that when hot air starts blowing out the intake port on you. Okay, a couple more things about flow testing the exhaust. We do it with a header. When we do a lot of flow testing, we put some tubes on here and we exit it out this hole in the wall outside the room. The reason we do that is to keep the room cool. The other thing we have in this particular room is we have an exhaust fan. Even when we're flow testing a bunch of intakes, the room gets kind of warm. So we have an exhaust fan to keep the room cooler. The reason you want the room cooler at a consistent temperature is so your results will be more repeatable. It's all about being able to repeat things, and if the temperature in a room heats up 15 degrees, which isn't uncommon if you're doing a lot of exhaust testing, that will have an effect on the correction factors within the computer. Okay, so you want to keep everything as consistent as possible. So that's about it with flow testing the exhaust. A lot to think of. When you do the exhaust, most people don't spend as much time on the exhaust. They generally use the 80-20 rule. We spend about 80% of the time working on the intake and about 20% of the time on the exhaust. And getting good exhaust numbers is something that's very, very important. With this particular setup, you can do it quickly, you can do it accurately, and you can do it consistently, but remember to try to keep the room as consistent in temperature as possible. So if you have any questions or comments, post them below, and we'll see you in the next installment.